Welcome to 24 KEIRUS. I'm Kelly Johnson, founder and CEO of KEIRUS by KJE. Welcome to a new series where we will be talking about mental health awareness, its correlation and just connection to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're in for a treat with my guest for this series. Britni Cannon is a licensed professional counselor with just many years of experience in a variety of roles, direct care, seeing clients one-on-one, also working on a corporate level with employee assistance programs, and now in a director of learning role within mental health space. So Britni, welcome to 24 KEIRUS.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. And just caveat, Britni and I go way back. So if we cut up for this, just go ahead and roll with it.
Right.
But I will say that you and I have had conversations about this just even privately, in particular during the pandemic and when George Floyd occurred. I know you and I had some really serious and important conversations. So I appreciate that. Within your profession, you have also made space to really take the time to understand and express how important DEI is to mental health. But maybe for those who don't see the correlation and connection, maybe talk about how in the world does mental health and even DEI kind of go in the same conversation?
Absolutely. I think that, when we engage in the workplace, I think as a Black female professionally, one of the first things I do is look around and see who looks like me. And I think that has a big impact on how we feel that we connect, right? Or fit in and with our employer, right? And in our careers. And I think it's very important to have that diversity piece, but not feeling like you're just that number, right? You're just checking a box. And so it does definitely have a huge impact on mental health when you don't see anyone that looks like you. You can't identify with people in the workplace on that level, because we know that diversity is many things, right? It's not our outward appearance. It's being a mom in the workforce. It's being, older in the workforce. And so there's so many aspects of it. And I think those layers make us feel comfortable, right? And they make us feel like we're wanted and we're an important part of the workforce that we work in. And I think with mental health, when those things are absent, right, it makes us feel reserved. It makes us not feel as comfortable. How do I engage with others? Will this be seen a certain way? Do I have to be the tokenness, right? And so that's a heavy stressor for individuals to not feel like they have any identifiers or connectors, anyone that's parallel to them in the workplace.
I love how you describe that diversity is about layers, layers of our identity, layers of who we are as a person or a human. And I think just the importance of being able to connect with people that we either have something in common with, or even if someone has a different background, but feeling maybe safe and okay to, I can still be authentic, you can still be authentic, and we can still have a great working relationship, or we can even have, heaven forbid, fun at work, right?
Right, sure.
But maybe talk a little bit about and in particular, I know you have worked in sort of the EAP, Employer Assistance Program space. Hopefully you can share this on a thematic level, but what are some ways that you have seen kind of diversity, inclusion, or lack thereof? How does that actually play out in the workplace? How are people affected by when that inclusion or that lack of representation exists?
Sure. And I think it's an aspect that's really difficult for employers. There's this fine line of not wanting to offend and including, right? And being open to all. So there's so many aspects to consider. So it can be difficult for employers. But I think that when we don't identify or we feel that we're not supported in that environment, we spend a lot of our time working, right? And it's a huge part of our lives, right? It's our livelihood, right? Everyone needs their check, their paycheck. Most people aren't working just for fun. And so to feel that lack of value, it's a heavy weight on employees. And I think it leads to faster burnout. It leads to carryover, from that blurring of work-life balance, and a lot of people are struggling to figure that out. And I think even with the pandemic, right, and the things that we've seen, yeah, we're, a few years removed from the pandemic, but that definitely blurred a line for people between work and home, because a lot of people were home, right? And then now you're finding this piece where I can do it from home, but maybe my employer won't allow me to do it from home, and then expecting more, right? And so, and I think it leads to a lot of burnout, and a lot of when the burnout is there, employees don't do well at work. They don't perform well. And so I think that you hear it a lot, especially with work stuff, right? And EAP. And EAP is an interesting balance, because usually your employer is paying for the EAP benefit, right? And so if you're calling certain people through the EAP benefit, there's limits to what can be discussed. And so I really do encourage individuals, if they're finding, they're overwhelmed by work, if you find that as you're driving into work, closer to work, you get headaches, the stress, the fever, the pains, those kinds of things. If you're finding those symptoms, if you're dreading going to work, I would definitely, really check in with yourself to see, is it work? Is it you? Is it the combination of things? Is it, home life? What is the deeper issue? And I really definitely encourage the exploration of that as well.
I appreciate what you're saying, that when things aren't right, whatever that is, when I maybe don't feel valued or seen or appreciated, plus,
right.
The things that I might be dealing with at home, you described it as a heavy weight to carry, and I can personally relate to that. I just wonder, what are your thoughts on, like, what can organizations do to kind of raise awareness, first of all, about mental health, its significance, and then just even kind of taking it a step further, like the self-care?
Sure. I say, I'm going to answer the self-care part first. Encourage your staff to take their vacations, their PTO, have a PTO that option that is valid, right? Not, a week's worth of vacation for your sick time and everything, because then employees are trying to stretch it out, right? Individuals are trying to stretch it out and feel that they can't take that time. And that is a benefit for employees. And so, I really encourage employers to encourage their staff to take that time, especially as supervisors or managers. If you're seeing your staff is not taking it, hey, you haven't taken any PTO and we're halfway through the year. Is there some time off that you would like to get scheduled? Things of that nature. I also think it's opening conversations, right? To be able to say, hey, maybe this week or for the next 2 weeks, I have these things going on. Is it possible that I can adjust my work schedule so that I'm not so stressed trying to fit in this 8 to 5, 9 to 5 schedule that doesn't really work, right? And a lot of those schedules tend to be arbitrary for employees, because they're not necessarily dealing with international people or people in different time zones. It's local. And so that option could be something that, could be an option to explore as they need to balance work and life, home life. But I just think having conversations, allowing, employees, when they take the time, to not push back on them. Oh, well, we're going to need this big project is coming up, encourage and appreciate that they're taking it, right? And respond in that way that doesn't make them feel that they're being penalized for taking it.
Yeah.
That's huge. No, that's huge.
I was going to say something that we try to practice here, and I've had some leaders who've done this for me, some not so much, but I know with our team, we try to, if someone is taking PTO, or if they're not feeling well, like, really take it.
Right.
Because there's one thing to take the time off, and I'm guilty, but if you're still on,
yeah,
if you're still checking and responding to emails or Teams messages right away, you're not really taking the time off. And so I think as leaders, we have a responsibility to say, hey, I noticed the last few nights you've been sending emails really late to me. Like, what are you doing to get rest? Like, making sure that you are, to the degree you can, modeling the behavior
Absolutely.
of self-care.
Absolutely.
Please don't turn this into a therapy session, because I'm self accountability here.
I understand.
But also just say, kind of as an example, I set a timer. So I might type the email late at night at a time that really no one should be working, but I schedule send it.
Exactly.
So that my team member doesn't get it until like normal work hours. Right. And so I think as leaders, even as coworkers, if you're not in a leadership role, but you see a teammate kind of like looking really tired, like, I think everybody has a role. When it comes to inclusion, we all have a responsibility to try to help care for other people.
Absolutely.
So anything you want to add to that?
Absolutely. I do. I think it's, noticing people, because I think just asking someone, hey, you okay today, goes a long way, right? If you see something different, if you see something out of the norm, checking in. I know you talked about your mom last week being sick. How's she doing? Is she feeling better? Those kinds of things. And I think that is developed through a connection with people. Yeah. Just genuinely caring about people and what they're going through, their needs are, and getting to know them. And I think when that happens organically, it feels really good to an individual when, oh, you remembered, and it adds that little bit of brightness to their day to know someone cares.
Yeah. I know Cigna did this study a few years ago. So the data, or the study's a little old, but I think the insights were so poignant to me, which was around loneliness in the workplace.
Yes.
And this was pre-pandemic. So I think I actually appreciate and like that it's an old study, because it shows before the pandemic, we had issues.
That was definitely an issue.
So talk a little bit about maybe the impact of loneliness, because that may not seem like a DEI issue if you just talk about loneliness.
Sure.
But can you maybe speak to just how either diversity and inclusion or a focus on it can address clearly an issue that we had long before the last few years?
Yeah. And actually, I remember that study from Cigna and the loneliness and the impact, right? Because it impacts your work. And your performance at work. And so when I think DEI helps to really, if you help to celebrate those differences, because that's how we connect, is through our differences, honestly. We don't want a workforce that everyone has the same exact thoughts, right? Because we don't get any creativity, we don't get any new insight. And so making sure that, I think the diversity and inclusion piece, it's more inclusion, right? Setting these maybe work groups for people that won't really step out, right? They're more the introvert, they're the shyer type. And so how do we get them engaged, right? Sometimes it's a book club at work. Sometimes it's, we're going to sponsor things in the break room at a certain time so people come in there and have these conversations, not just grab and go. And so in being very intentional about what you do for your employees and how to bring them in. Yeah. Right. And I know we don't want to really bother anyone, and we want people to get back to work and produce, but I do think it's important to have set times for engagement, right? So you can maybe you're sitting next to someone and they just start chatting. Yeah. And then you develop a work relationship. And I do think people tend to keep work and home very separate. I have great work friends, but we don't do anything outside of work per se. And so, that there is a tight bond. And when you see other people forming those bonds, but you're on the outside of that, it can be, that create that loneliness and depression. And in turn, it reduces the productivity, right? Or job satisfaction. And maybe it's not the role, but it's the loneliness within the organization. Yeah. And so how you're engaging and touching with people is important.
Yeah, I think as we get ready to wrap up, a story that's coming to mind is a group of people that I worked with probably almost 18 years ago, potentially. We happen to be all women, this particular team, and we still get together once every few years for dinner. Yeah. And of course, there's been a few years because of the pandemic and everything that we haven't done that, but we're getting together for dinner this month.
Yeah.
And we haven't worked together in a very, very, very long time. But I do think it speaks to just the power of relationships.
Absolutely.
We were diverse, and
Sure.
kind of 18 years ago, that DEI wasn't as like popular, commonplace. But I think about just the backgrounds of the women that were on that team, and we all became mothers through that time period that we worked together. And we were laughing in our text chat or text change that that is a part of our connection.
Absolutely.
Motherhood, even though we came from different backgrounds, our careers all went in completely different directions after we left the organization. But I do think it speaks to like how inclusion in particular can really help combat that that loneliness, but also the burnout. And just, I think one takeaway I would just maybe leave is that the impact goes beyond the time that you work with people.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes we lose sight of that.
Yeah, and we all have those work friends, right? Maybe we'll text about, can you believe this project? Why is this a meeting? And those things. But there's also those deeper connections. I have a coworker that after many miscarriages found out she was pregnant. And just that joy that I felt for her, and the connection. We don't work together any longer, but there's still the conversation about family and life and connection. So I think we all need that, right? We all need to see people that we can relate to. And that doesn't mean that they have to look like us, sound like us, have the same beliefs, but there has to be some piece that we can connect to.
Yeah. Okay, this has been a really good start to this conversation about mental health and its connection to DEI. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I know you're going to come back so we can keep this conversation going. This has been another episode of 24 KEIRUS, where we help you live out your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion 24/7. Make sure that you subscribe to this channel, share this episode. This one gesture could really make a difference in someone's life and in their well-being. So until next time, we'll see you soon.